r/Nosleep. Posted by u/sleepyhollow_101. I'm a horror writer, and I think I just made a big mistake. If you talk to someone who's been a writer for any length of time, chances are they will tell you about the story. All authors have one. You see, there are stories that we create. Stories that we think up and plot out and control. And then there are stories that fight with us for control, stories that have their own mind and their own goals that we must contend with. But the story represents the one time that the author completely loses control over the creation. Where the story is already a living thing, bleeding from the author's veins through their pen. It cannot be changed, it cannot be reasoned with, it cannot be justified. It simply is, and the writer is helpless to stop it from coming into existence. You'll know when you find the story. It enslaves you, grabs hold of your mind in a death grip. You'll feel insane unless you write it out, so of course you do, but there is still a sense of unease, a sense of total helplessness towards what people believe to be your own creation. Oh, you'll be praised for it, most certainly. People will define it as your best work yet. But you'll know the truth. It isn't yours. It never has been. Every writer has their own version of the story. And this is Camilla's. Although Camilla and I lived in the same neighborhood, we actually met online. We are both horror writers and regularly contribute to the same few websites. We met on a chat room dedicated to horror authors and our friendship sprung from there. It only took us about a week of talking to realize that we lived so close, and we met up soon after that. Camilla was exceptional, in her own way. She was petite and had innocent doe eyes that took up half her head, but she still managed to exude a powerful energy as though it had pooled deep inside her somewhere in an endless store. She had short, spiked brown hair and her skin was so pale it was almost vampiric. She used to joke with me about that, saying that it was only fit that a horror writer look like a corpse. Although we were friends, our writing styles and story topics were vastly different. I like writing gore, torture, and tragedy. My stories are never short victims and I don't find myself pulling back punches. Camilla, on the other hand, focused on psychological horror. She tended towards bittersweet or even happy endings when she could manage them, but she liked to twist her characters' minds, warp them until they were unrecognizable before putting them out of their misery. Unlike me, she was always worried that she would write something too offensive, too extreme. It's a common problem for young horror writers. Someone who has been writing as long as I have knows that there is nothing offensive enough that someone out there won't enjoy it. For how different we were, Camilla and I definitely worked well together. Oh, we never collaborated on a story or anything. No, we would meet up, usually at a cafe or something, and just write in each other's company. We could bounce ideas off of each other, keep each other on track, and occasionally proofread to make sure our stories were ready for posting. For the few months we spent together, we got closer and closer. Soon, we were writing together every day, and even hanging out at each other's apartments. That's why I wasn't surprised when I was the first person she told about the story. I knew something was bothering her when she came to talk to me about it. Her eyes were clouded over with worry and there was a tiny furrow between her brows, which told me that she wasn't sure if she should be worried, but she was, anyway. When I asked her what was wrong, she asked me her own question in turn. Sean, do you ever get the feeling that you're not in control of the story? Like the story you're writing isn't yours? I knew right away that she had found it. Her own personal version of the story. She was unprepared and a little bit confused by it, but I told her everything that I've just told you. That it's normal. That every author has at least one. That she should get it over with and write it out, because she has too. She seemed a little troubled by this, but didn't argue with me. Whatever I said struck a chord with her, because she took my words as truth and set about writing the story. That's when things started to change. When we were still writing together, I could tell that she was struggling with the story. To be more specific, she was fighting it. It's not really that uncommon for an author to seek control over what they perceive to be their own story. I guess that was her problem. She still thought of it as hers. But it wasn't, and deep down, she knew that, just as I knew it. It came from somewhere else, as they all do, and whether she liked it or not wasn't really relevant. As the weeks went on, she continued to write. I have to admit, I was surprised. She usually pounded out stories fairly quickly, opting to write shorter creepypasta-esque stories rather than novels. But this wasn't just any story, it was the story and she couldn't rush it along, even if she had wanted to. And as the weeks went on and she began to grow gaunt, I got the feeling that she really wanted to. Soon after I noticed the change in her person, she stopped seeing me entirely. I still wasn't very concerned. The story is always a draining experience, one that forces the writer into themselves, controlled by that which they seek to create. When I first found mine, I shut myself in my room for 2 weeks, my mind a chaotic swirl that I couldn't seem to break away from. After a month, I started to worry, but still, I didn't intervene. One night, about a month and a half after I had last seen her, something changed. I didn't know what, precisely, only that I could feel it somewhere in my mind, somewhere associated with her, and I found myself rushing out the door, grabbing the keys to my car and visualizing the route to her apartment. It figures that I wouldn't sense it until it was too late. She didn't answer when I knocked, but the door was unlocked, so I decided to let myself in. It was trespassing, sure, but I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. As much as I'd like to remember Camilla the way she was, spunky, bright, and strangely optimistic for a horror writer, I can't scrub that final image she presented from my brain. Whenever I hear her name, that is what I'll think of, regardless of the pain it brings me. If I hadn't known what to look for, I wouldn't have known it was her. Her spiky brown hair was longer, now, and ragged. It looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, although now I think that was probably because of the blood. She was frail, tiny, even, the nubs of her bones clearly visible through her skin. Her eyes were sunk deep in her face, ringed with black, and I almost couldn't see their previously vibrant blue, now dulled and rimmed with bloodshot veins. She sat at the other end of the room, her knees drawn up to her chest, her arms hugged tight around them. Her breathing was rough and she was shaking hard. Immediately, I knew she needed a hospital. She was so far gone that I considered walking over and just carrying her down to my car. I would have, too, if the light from the hallway hadn't struck something in her hand just then, glinting fiercely as if mocking me. She was holding a knife. I hadn't realized that she'd noticed my presence until just then. Her voice lilted towards me, strangely quiet, strangely monotone. "Do you want to hear something funny, Sean?" she asked. "Camilla, what happened? Put down the knife, I'm taking you to the hospital." She continued as though she hadn't heard me. "I'm a horror writer. I write death and destruction and terror for fun. Not even for money, just because I enjoy it. And you know something? I hate blood. It terrifies me, actually. It makes me sick to my stomach, makes me feel faint. Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous in your whole life?" She laughed then. It was a high, keening, frantic sound, and it bounced around in my head like a ricocheted bullet. "Yes, I hate blood," she said. "But I love pain. I think for me it's about control. After all, isn't causing pain the ultimate form of control? Even if that pain is to your own person." Her arms unsnicked from her legs as they lowered to the ground, stretching out so that she was sitting like a rag doll. I could see now how her dirty clothes hung from her frame as though they were 2 sizes too big. I supposed that, after all these weeks, they were. She turned her left arm over, its pale underside a shocking contrast to the darkness of the room. The knife in her right hand began to trail patterns on her left arm, and she watched it curiously, as though it was not of her command. "Camilla. Seriously, put the knife down. Whatever's wrong, I can help, okay? Just let me talk to you." My plea went unheeded. As soon as I finished talking, she plunged the knife into her arm, the blade digging so deep into her skin that I swear it tasted bone. I heard a sharp intake of breath, but otherwise there was no sign that she'd felt the pain. Her eyes remained dull and expressionless. A mockery of a smile twisted its way onto her lips. "Yes. This is the only thing that I'm sure exists." I was rooted to the spot, watching as she carved her arms, trying to inscribe her pain onto her soft flesh. I wanted to run forward, to scream at her to stop, to wrench the knife from her hands. Even in her current state, I didn't think she'd hurt me, but I had no qualms about subduing her if she tried, but my body simply wouldn't move. Finally, she raised her eyes to look at me. There was still something of her inside them, something that was dying out. She tried to give me a real smile then, I know she did, but it was like she had forgotten how. She brought the knife up to dance along her neck as her quiet voice sliced through the room. "Sean, do me a favor, and please, please, don't read it." And before I could scream to stop her, she plunged the knife straight through her throat in an attempt to sever her spinal cord. I have seen a lot of things in my life. I have seen exorcisms and I have seen people beaten half to death. I have seen all manner of wounds, from gunshot wounds to knife wounds. Never in my life have I seen so much blood. I called an ambulance and I tried to staunch the bleeding. I didn't take out the knife, for fear of making it worse. I tried my damnedest to keep her awake. The EMTs weren't surprised that I failed on all accounts. "By the looks of it, she was pretty damn sick by the time that you got to her, man," said one as they loaded her body into the back of the ambulance. "You did everything you could, but it wasn't meant to be." Easy for him to say. He didn't have to watch his friend's bloodless corpse being rolled onto a stretcher, bound for the city morgue. Nothing happened for about a month after that. I went to her funeral, of course. I met her family and some of her other friends. I thought about her fairly constantly. I wondered if there was something I could have done, but I squashed those thoughts as soon as they arose. There was only madness down that road, a deeper madness than what I was already accustomed to. I'd leave it alone. My life had just begun to return to normal when I received a letter. Well, I thought it was a letter. It came in a white envelope and had my name on it. No address, no sender, no stamp. It must have been hand-delivered, but to what purpose? Curious, I took it into my home office and tore it open, wondering what mysteries awaited. It was a USB. Now I was definitely intrigued. I plugged the drive into my computer and waited for it to register, deciding that my writing could wait until later. There was only one document on the drive and it was unnamed. I clicked it open and my breath caught in my throat. The first page read Amon by Camilla Paglia. So this was it. The story that trapped Camilla, that drove her insane. Or had it? Maybe she had always been a little unstable and this was just the final push over the edge. But something told me that wasn't quite true. No, there was something about this story that was special. And I wanted to know what it was. Of course, my mind went back to that awful night when she committed suicide. Her last request to me, "Please don't read it." Could I really deny the only thing she asked of me? It seemed unlikely. I almost closed out of the document and tossed the USB in the trash when I scrolled down just a little and saw something interesting on the next page. For Sean Collette. Well, now I had to read it. The temptation was too great to resist. Not only was it a cursed piece written by a dead girl, but it was dedicated to me. It seems that the fates had aligned to bring this to me, so I shrugged my shoulders and I settled in for a long reading session, wondering what the story would reveal to me. I was so painfully naive. 2 days after finishing the story, I still felt sick to my stomach. I'm not an easy person to scare or disgust. No horror writer is. But that story. God damn it, it got to me, and I haven't been able to get it out ever since. It wormed its way inside me and it's been draining my energy like a parasite. She must really have been sick to write it, I decided. Sick, and I didn't want to know with what. But things have changed since I read that story. There's been something gnawing at me, something that won't go away. I can't sleep and every time I try to eat it only makes me sick. When I close my eyes, I see flashes of something staring at me, something. Waiting. Always in the back of my mind I hear that name. Amon. Amon. You know, I was surprised by her story. She grew up Catholic, so demon stories are usually something she refused to touch. They disturbed her too much, she'd say, reminded her of things she'd rather forget. I never pried, but now I wish I had. The first demon story she ever wrote and it killed her. And you know something? Since I read it, a story has been forming in my mind, as well. It's slowly coming to the surface of my consciousness, stealing away my energy and forcing me to look in towards myself. It's just like the story, but it feels more sinister. It has its own agenda, of course, but now I feel that I have to question it. My hand is itching to pick up a pen and write, but I'm resisting it as best as I can. I have to. Because the story killed her and I think it's going to kill me next.